She replaced her sister on the night shift unaware. The man in a coma was a millionaire who'd change her life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. She replaced her sister on the night shift, unaware the man in a coma was a millionaire who would change her life. The rain outside the hospital fell in steady silver lines, tapping gently against the tall glass windows. The corridors of St. Mark's Medical Center were quiet, filled only with the low hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic. Under the dim fluorescent lights, a young nurse hurried through the hallway, her sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor. Her name was Monroe. She was not supposed to be here tonight. Her sister, Nora, had twisted her ankle that morning and in desperation begged Lily to take her night shift. Lily was only a temporary nurse, still finishing her certification exams, but she could not say no. Rent was due, and their mother's medical bills were piling up. So here she was tired, nervous, and trying not to look lost. At the end of the corridor, a soft alarm blinked red on the wall. Room 601. Lily glanced at her clipboard and frowned. Weird, she whispered. Nora said this room was low priority. She pushed the door open quietly. Inside, the world seemed to stop. The room was large, wrapped in soft shadows from the city lights beyond the window. A man lay motionless in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that blinked rhythmically like a heartbeat in slow motion. His face was pale, almost peaceful, his chest rising and falling under the blanket. Lily stepped closer, reading the name on the chart at the foot of the bed. The handwriting was smudged, but she caught one word. Grant. No last name, just that. She adjusted the IV line, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, and whispered, "You must be sleeping deeply, Mr. Grant. I am just covering for tonight. I will not bother you." She checked his pulse, steady but faint, then sighed. It felt strange talking to someone who could not respond. But something about the man's face-sharp jawline, the faint scar above his eyebrow, made her pause. He looked strong, the kind of person who once filled a room without saying a word. Outside, thunder rumbled. The power flickered for half a second, and Lily's heart jumped. She tightened her grip on the flashlight and looked back at him. The heart monitor beeped louder, a single spike of sound breaking the silence. Then it returned to normal. "Guess that scared both of us," she said softly, forcing a nervous smile. On the nightstand sat a bouquet of dried roses and a folded newspaper. The headline read, "Pharmavision CEO, still in coma after highway accident." Her breath caught. She looked back at the man in the bed, eyes wide. "No way," she whispered. But the photo on the page, dark hair, same scar, confirmed it. She had just spoken to Grant Walters, the youngest millionaire in the city, a man whose name appeared on every medical breakthrough in the last 5 years. Lily sank into the chair beside his bed, torn between fear and awe. "Well," she murmured, "you probably do not care who changes your IV bag, but I am Lily, and I guess I am your nurse tonight." She smiled faintly, the kind of tired smile that hid too many worries. She did not notice that the heart monitor flickered again, just once, as if something deep inside him had heard her voice. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the city clean. Inside, a quiet story had just begun. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the city still wore the color of gray dawn. Inside St. Mark's Medical Center, Lily Monroe blinked against the harsh white light as she signed her end-of-shift report. Her eyes felt heavy from lack of sleep. She had stayed longer than required, quietly checking on the patient in room 601 before leaving. Something about that silent man haunted her. She had seen hundreds of patients before, but none carried that strange presence even in stillness. Maybe it was the quiet dignity in his face, or the way his heart monitor seemed to echo her own pulse. She shook off the thought. He was far beyond her world. If the newspaper was right, he was worth more money than the entire hospital. Lily changed into her worn gray hoodie and walked out into the crisp morning air. The coffee truck outside the gate was already serving. She ordered the smallest size, counting the few dollars she had left. As she waited, she pulled out her sketchbook and looked at the unfinished portrait she had made last night. Just a few pencil strokes, but they captured the peace she saw in him. The vendor handed her the cup. "Rough night?" he asked. Lily smiled faintly. "The kind where coffee feels like medicine." She tucked the sketchbook into her bag and headed home. Her apartment was small, barely enough space for a bed, a sink, and a few medical books stacked like a tower. On the fridge was a note from Nora. "Thank you for covering for me. You are my hero." Lily smiled, but her eyes were tired. She had to return to her regular ward that evening. There was no time for rest when rent was due next week. By the time she returned to the hospital that night, the halls buzzed louder than usual. Nurses whispered in groups, and a few doctors gathered around the staff board. "Did you hear?" someone murmured. Room 601's vitals improved for the first time in months. Lily froze. Her heart skipped. She tried to act casual, checking the patient list as if she had not been in that room the previous night. But her hands trembled. She had to know. When the supervisor left the floor for rounds, Lily slipped quietly toward the VIP wing. The door to 601 was half open. A faint hum of machines leaking through. The man Grant Walters looked exactly the same, but the monitors told a different story. The heart rate was stronger. Oxygen levels had risen slightly. The attending nurse had written a note. "Possible neurological response observed. Repeat tests tomorrow." Lily's breath caught. "Did you hear me last night?" she whispered. "Was that you trying to say something?" She took a seat beside him, setting down her cup of coffee. The steam curled upward like a ghost of the storm. "You know, Mr. Walters," she continued softly, "I read about you. The articles make you sound untouchable, the kind of man who never gets tired, never makes mistakes. But you look human to me. Maybe that is why people forget that even strong men fall." She paused, feeling foolish for talking to someone who could not answer. Yet somehow, the silence between them did not feel empty. It felt listening. Her phone buzzed. A text from Nora. "Do not go near the VIP wing again. The chief nurse is suspicious." Lily exhaled slowly, guilt twisting in her chest. She rose, about to leave, when the monitor beeped again, sharper this time. She turned. His right hand moved, barely an inch, but unmistakably. Lily's eyes widened. Oh my God! She pressed the call button, but then stopped herself. What if it was just a spasm? What if she was wrong? The monitor steadied, the line returning to its gentle rhythm. She stood there, trembling, unsure if she had imagined it. The intercom crackled. "Nurse Monroe, report to Ward B." She startled, gathering her things quickly. Before leaving, she leaned close and whispered, "If you can hear me, Mr. Walters, keep fighting. I will come back." Outside, the corridor lights dimmed for the night. Lily walked away, unaware that inside the room, the millionaire's fingers twitched again, stronger this time, just as her footsteps faded down the hall. That same night, in another part of the city, a man in a black suit watched the hospital's live feed from his laptop. He was Grant Walters' assistant, keeping silent watch for any sign of change. When the monitor in room 601 showed its brief surge, he sat up straight. "He moved," he whispered. Then he rewound the footage and noticed something else. The young nurse. The one with the sketchbook, sitting by the bed, talking gently as if she knew him. He leaned closer to the screen, curious. "Who is she?" he murmured. And in that quiet moment, fate began to weave their stories tighter. One small mistake, one forbidden visit, and a heartbeat that refused to stay silent. 2 days later, the rain returned, light and steady like a familiar song. Lily Monroe hurried across the parking lot of St. Mark's Medical Center, her umbrella tilting against the wind. The hospital lights shimmered through the mist, and fatigue pressed heavy behind her eyes. She had not stopped thinking about the movement she saw in room 601. Inside the break room, nurses chatted over instant coffee. One of them waved a headline. "Grant Walters' condition improves," she read aloud. "Doctors call it a miracle." Lily froze mid-step, her heart pounding. She pretended to look for sugar packets, but her hands trembled. Miracle. That was the same word she had whispered before leaving his room. When her shift started, she checked her patient list again. Her name was not assigned to the VIP floor, but curiosity pulled stronger than fear. During her midnight rounds, she quietly slipped down the empty corridor toward room 601. The light inside was dim, the rhythmic beeping soft and steady. Mr. Walters looked the same, still and pale, but his eyelids fluttered once, faint as a breeze. Lily gasped and stepped closer. "Good evening, Mr. Walters," she whispered, setting her clipboard aside. "It is me again. I probably should not be here, but I had to check on you. Everyone is calling it a miracle. I think maybe you heard me somehow." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her sketchbook. The page from that night still held the unfinished drawing. She sat by the bed, adding gentle lines around his closed eyes. Her pencil moved softly across the paper as she talked. "When my dad was in the hospital, I used to talk to him too. The doctors said he could not hear me, but I wanted to believe my words made a difference." She looked up and smiled sadly. "Maybe that is foolish, but hope is all we have sometimes." The monitor beeped louder for a moment, as if agreeing. Lily's breath caught. She pressed her hand over his, careful and light. His skin was warm, not cold like before. She could feel life humming beneath the surface. "You are fighting," she said softly. "That is good. Do not stop." Outside, footsteps echoed. Lily quickly pulled her hand away as the door opened. Dr. Harris, the head of neurology, stepped inside. His eyes narrowed. "Nurse Monroe, what are you doing here? You are not assigned to this patient." Her throat went dry. I was just checking his vitals. The monitors looked unstable earlier." "Doctor," Harris studied her face, then glanced at the monitor. "They look fine to me," he said flatly. "Return to your floor. And Monroe, do not enter this room again, without authorization." "Yes, doctor." Her voice was small, her heart heavy. She gathered her things and left quickly. But as the door closed, Dr. Harris lingered, frowning. He looked at the chart, then at the man in the bed. "Strange," he murmured. "He shows more neural activity every night." "True." Lily walked back through the quiet hall, shame and confusion twisting inside her. She knew she should not have been there, yet something deeper told her she was meant to be. That feeling stayed with her all night, growing stronger with every heartbeat. The next morning, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Miss Monroe?" a calm male voice said. "This is Ethan Cole, assistant to Mr. Walters. I would like to meet with you, if possible." "So?" Lily blinked, stunned. "His assistant? Why?" "Let us just say I have reason to believe your presence has affected Mr. Walters' recovery. Please come to the hospital cafeteria at noon." The call ended before she could reply. At noon, she found Ethan waiting near the window, dressed in a dark suit, expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I have reviewed security footage. You were in room 601 several times last week." Lily's heart thudded. "I can explain. You do not need to. In fact, I want to thank you. Mr. Walters' vital signs began to improve after your visits. The doctors cannot explain it, but I can see the pattern." She stared at him, speechless. "You think I had something to do with that?" "I think," he said carefully, "that sometimes the body responds to compassion in ways science cannot measure. Mr. Walters' brain scans show small but increasing activity every time you were near." Lily's hands trembled. "That cannot be real." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but he has been in a coma for 7 months. And now, for the first time, he shows signs of waking up." She sank into the chair, overwhelmed. "I did not mean to break any rules. I just wanted to make sure he was not alone." "Then keep doing that," Ethan said quietly. "Talk to him. Be yourself. I will make sure no one questions it." Lily looked at him in disbelief. "You are serious?" He nodded. "If you could help bring him back, even a little, that would be worth everything." That night, Lily returned to room 601 openly, her name now listed on the logbook. She sat beside him, holding her sketchbook close. The room was still, except for the steady rhythm of the monitor. "Good evening again," she whispered. "They say you might wake up soon. I hope when you do, you will remember the sound of my voice." Her fingers brushed his hand gently, and for the first time, his eyelids moved. Not a twitch, but a slow, deliberate flicker, like a curtain rising on the first act of something miraculous. Lily froze, tears stinging her eyes. "You heard me," she breathed. "You really heard me." And somewhere inside that fragile stillness, a heartbeat answered. The next few nights felt like something out of a dream. Each evening, Lily Monroe arrived at room 601, the halls quieter than the world outside, and the soft green light of the monitor seemed to greet her like a heartbeat waiting for her voice. She talked about everything and nothing. About the patients on her floor, the cafeteria coffee that tasted like paper, her mother's garden back home, and how she wished she could afford to take a painting class one day. Sometimes, when she laughed, the corners of Grant Walters's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly, like a shadow of recognition. On the fifth night, Dr. Harris stopped her in the corridor. His tone was less severe than before. "Nurse Monroe," he said, glancing at the tablet in his hand. "Mr. Walters's neurological responses are increasing again. Whatever you are doing, keep the environment consistent. No stress, calm voices." "Understood?" "Yes, doctor," she replied, heart pounding. He was not accusing her anymore. He was quietly acknowledging what everyone else had begun to notice. That evening, Lily read aloud from a book she had borrowed from the hospital library. Her voice filled the stillness, gentle and steady. "Sometimes," she read, "the smallest act of kindness becomes the spark that brings light back to a life." As she turned the page, a quiet gasp left her lips. Grant's hand moved, just slightly, but enough that she saw it. She froze, eyes wide. "Mr. Walters, can you hear me?" His fingers curled, faint but intentional. The monitor beeped faster, not in alarm, but with life. Lily pressed the call button, her voice trembling. "Dr. Harris, room Lobalingi. He is responding." Moments later, the room filled with footsteps. Dr. Harris, 2 nurses, and Ethan Cole rushed in. They ran a quick examination, the air thick with tension. Grant's eyelids fluttered again, his breathing deepening. "He is fighting to wake up," Dr. Harris murmured. "After 7 months. This is extraordinary." Lily stepped back, tears forming in her eyes. Ethan glanced at her with a quiet smile. "I think he knows you are here." Over the next hours, the team worked carefully, adjusting oxygen and reducing sedation. The night stretched long, but no one left. Finally, near dawn, Grant's eyes opened unfocused at first, then steady. He blinked against the light, his voice hoarse and dry. "Where am I?" Dr. Harris leaned forward. "St. Mark's Medical Center. You have been in a coma, Mr. Walters. Try not to move." Grant's gaze drifted around the room until it stopped on Lily. Confusion crossed his face, then something else recognition, though he could not explain why. "You?" he whispered, barely audible. "You were talking to me." Lily's throat tightened. "Yes, you heard me." He tried to smile, but exhaustion pulled him back under. The doctors took over, but that single moment stayed with her like sunlight breaking through the clouds. Later that morning, after the medical team confirmed his stable condition, reporters swarmed the hospital. The story spread faster than anyone could control. The sleeping millionaire awakes. Some called it a miracle. Others whispered about the young nurse whose voice brought him back. By noon, Lily's photo taken secretly from the security footage was already circulating online. Her supervisor called her into the office. "You are suspended until further notice," the woman said coldly. "There are questions about how often you were in his room." Lily's heart sank. "I did not mean to cause trouble. I just wanted to help." "Intentions do not matter," the supervisor replied. "Public attention is a liability." She walked out of the office in silence, her ID badge feeling heavy around her neck. Outside, reporters crowded near the main entrance. Flashes went off, microphones shoved forward. "Miss Monroe, is it true you were the one who woke him? Were you in love with Mr. Walters?" She pushed through the chaos, her face burning. "No comment," she said softly, clutching her bag. That evening, she sat alone in her apartment, the city lights flickering through thin curtains. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages and missed calls, but she ignored them. The world had turned her act of kindness into gossip. Then, a knock at the door. She hesitated before opening it. Ethan Cole stood there, holding an envelope. "Mr. Walters asked me to give you this," he said. Inside was a simple handwritten note. "You do not owe me anything, but please, do not disappear. Grant Walters." Her fingers trembled as she read it. For the first time since morning, she smiled, a small, fragile thing, but real. The next day, she returned to the hospital quietly, unsure if they would even let her in. But when she reached the VIP floor, the guards stepped aside. "He asked for you," one said. Inside, Grant was awake, sitting up slowly, his voice rough but warm. "You kept your promise," he said. "I told you I would come back," she answered, trying not to cry. He smiled faintly. "You did more than that. You brought me back." The monitor hummed softly behind them, steady and sure. For the first time in months, Grant Walters was truly alive, and Lily Monroe, the nurse who had walked into the wrong room, realized her life would never be the same. Grant Walters was moved from the ICU to a private recovery suite within a week. His progress stunned the doctors, and his story flooded every news outlet in the country. Cameras waited outside the hospital every day, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man who had awakened from a 7-month coma. But inside those quiet white walls, his focus was not on fame or interviews. It was on the nurse who had been there when no one else was. Lily Monroe tried to keep her visits short and professional, even after her suspension was lifted. She stood at his bedside during therapy sessions, adjusting his IV line, helping him sit up when the pain tightened his muscles. Grant watched her carefully, memorizing the calm rhythm in her movements. "You look exhausted," he said one morning, his voice rough from therapy. She smiled lightly. "You are my favorite patient, but you are also the most demanding one." "That sounds like a compliment," he teased, and for a brief second, his eyes lit up with genuine warmth. Each day brought small victories, Grant taking a few steps, his speech clearing, his strength returning. Yet every moment between them carried something unspoken. The air felt charged with gratitude, and something gentler, something neither dared to name. One afternoon, as she replaced the flowers by his window, he said quietly, "You know, I heard you." She turned, confused. "Heard me? When I was unconscious." "Your voice. It felt like a thread pulling me back. You talked about your father, about hope. I followed that voice out of the dark." Lily froze, her throat tightening. "I did not think you could hear any of it." "I did. Every word," he said. "It is strange, isn't it? A stranger's voice saving my life." She shook her head softly. "I was never saving you. I was just trying not to lose myself." He studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "Then maybe we saved each other." Their quiet routine continued for days. But outside the room, the world was turning sharp again. The board of directors at PharmaVision, the company Grant founded, was pressuring him to return to work and face investors. Some doubted his stability. Some whispered that the nurse miracle story had damaged his image. One afternoon, Ethan entered the room, his expression tense. "The board wants a press conference. They think your recovery needs a public explanation." Grant sighed. "They want proof that I am not crazy." "Arbor. They want control," Ethan corrected. "And they want you to distance yourself from her." He glanced at Lily, his voice low but firm. Lily's stomach dropped. "You mean me?" "It would be better," Ethan said carefully, "if the media stopped connecting your name to his." Grant looked at her, his jaw tightening. "No, I will not do that." "Grant," Ethan began. "No," he repeated, his tone sharper. "She was the only one here when everyone else gave up. I owe her my life. They can deal with that truth." After Ethan left, silence filled the room. Lily's eyes were fixed on the floor. "You should not fight them for me," she said. "It could hurt your career." He shook his head slowly. "Lily, my career almost cost me my life. I do not want to live by their terms anymore." That night, the hospital halls seemed to hum with whispers again. Nurses passed Lily with curious glances, and she overheard her name more than once. But when she entered Grant's room, he was already waiting with a calm smile. "I have an idea," he said. "The press conference is tomorrow morning. I want you there." "Grant, that is not a good idea." "It is the right one." The next morning, the main lobby overflowed with reporters. Cameras flashed as Grant walked in, supported by a cane but standing tall. The murmurs died when he reached the microphone. "7 months ago, I was lost between life and death," he began. "Science kept my body alive, but it was compassion that brought me back. There was one person who never treated me like a machine, who spoke to me when I could not answer. That voice guided me home." He turned slightly, and the cameras followed his gaze to where Lily stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands trembling. "Her name," he continued, "is Nurse Lily Monroe. I would not be standing here without her." The crowd erupted with questions and flashes. Lily felt her heart race as he gestured for her to join him. She hesitated, but his eyes were steady, grounding her. She walked forward, the noise blurring into a distant hum. When she stood beside him, Grant took her hand gently. "You once said hope was all we have," he said softly. "You were right. You gave me hope when I had none." The cameras caught the moment, but neither of them looked at the crowd. For a few seconds, the world disappeared. And there was only the quiet truth between them, one born from a mistake, a heartbeat, and a choice to care. After the conference, as they stepped out into the sunlight, Grant turned to her and said, "I think this is just the beginning, Lily." She smiled, feeling the warmth of the morning against her skin. "Then let us start over. No hospital rooms, no headlines, just two people who met by accident." He nodded. "The best accident of my life. And for the first time since the storm that had brought her to the wrong room, Lily Monroe laughed freely, unaware that the world watching from behind their screens was already calling it what it truly was, a fated mistake that turned into love. The days following the press conference felt like a blur. The story of the nurse who woke a millionaire was everywhere on television, in newspapers, across every social feed. People called it a modern miracle, a story of faith and compassion. But for Lily Monroe, the attention felt heavy. Every time she stepped outside, someone wanted a photo, a quote, or a comment about the man she had once whispered to in a quiet hospital room. Grant Walters noticed. Each time she entered his recovery suite, he saw how her shoulders tightened when her phone buzzed. "You do not have to keep answering them," he said gently. "You do not owe anyone your peace." "I know," she replied, forcing a small smile, "but it is strange. A month ago, I was invisible. Now everyone wants to know how it felt to talk to a man who could not hear me." Grant leaned back in his chair, his strength slowly returning day by day. "They are chasing the wrong story. It was never about me waking up. It was about you believing I could." Lily looked at him, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "You really believe that?" "I know that," he said softly. "When you spoke to me, it felt like light breaking through water. I just followed it home." "Oh?" For a moment, silence lingered, gentle and warm. Then he added with a faint grin, "And now, I think I owe you dinner. A real one, not hospital food." She laughed quietly. "You are still recovering. Maybe start with soup." "Fine," he said. "Soup and conversation. I will take it." Over the next week, Grant began walking on his own again. Physical therapy sessions replaced IV lines, and laughter began to replace the sterile silence of his room. He was still weak, but his eyes carried life again. He often insisted that Lily join him on the terrace between sessions. They would sit beneath the morning sun, the skyline stretching wide behind the hospital. "You know," he said one day, "when I first built my company, I thought success meant never stopping. Now I understand that slowing down is not failure, it is survival." Lily nodded. "I think that is what compassion is too. Slowing down long enough to see someone else's pain." "Depart." Grant looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You have that gift, and I want the world to see it." "What do you mean?" she asked. "I am establishing a new division under the Walters Foundation," he said. "A community wellness project, free clinics, mobile care units, art therapy programs. I want you to lead it." Her eyes widened. "Me? Grant? I am a nurse, not a director." He smiled. "You are both. You cared for me when every expert gave up. You understand healing in ways textbooks do not. Let me give you the resources to do it for others." Lily hesitated, her heart caught between fear and gratitude. "That is a lot to process." "Take your time," he said. "I am not asking for an answer today." But as she walked home that night, her thoughts would not settle. She looked up at the glowing skyline and realized that maybe fate had not made a mistake after all. Maybe everything, the rain, the wrong room, the voice that would not stop talking, had been leading her somewhere new. A week later, she accepted the position. The announcement caused another wave of headlines. "The nurse who changed a millionaire's life will now lead his new healing initiative." The world loved the story, but for Lily and Grant, it was no longer about publicity. It was about purpose. Months passed, and together they visited clinics across the city. Grant walked beside her, still using a cane, but with renewed confidence. Every time she explained a program to volunteers or smiled at children in the waiting area, he saw the same light that had pulled him from the darkness. One afternoon, during a charity event at the hospital, Grant pulled Lily aside. The room was filled with reporters, investors, and patients. Yet he seemed calm, almost peaceful. "Do you remember that first night?" he asked. She smiled. "The storm? The wrong room? The man who would not wake up?" "I do. I remember the sound of your voice," he said quietly. "It was the only thing I could hold on to." He reached into his pocket and took out a small silver pendant shaped like a heartbeat. This was made from the wiring of the heart monitor in room 601, the one that kept us both alive. Her eyes softened. "Grant." He took her hand. "You once said you did not think you were saving me, but you did. And now, I would like to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel invisible again." The room fell silent as he knelt, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hand. "Lily Monroe, will you marry me?" Her tears came before the words did. "Yes," she whispered. The crowd erupted in applause, but for Lily, it all faded into a single heartbeat, the same rhythm that had guided her through that long night months ago. Later, as they stood on the hospital rooftop, the city lights stretching endlessly below, Grant wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You replaced your sister for one night," he said softly, "and ended up changing both our lives." Lily smiled, leaning into him. "Maybe fate just needed a small mistake to find its way." Rye. And under the same quiet rain that had once brought her to room 601, their story born from a simple act of kindness found its beginning again, not as a miracle, but as a promise kept. The wedding of Grant Walters and Lily Monroe was small by choice. No flashing lights, no headlines, no luxury ballroom, just a quiet ceremony in the rooftop garden of St. Mark's Medical Center, the place where their story had begun. The early evening sky glowed soft gold, and a warm breeze carried the faint scent of roses from the planters lining the terrace. Lily wore a simple ivory dress, her hair loosely curled, and in her hands she carried a single white lily, a nod to her name. Grant stood waiting, still leaning slightly on his cane, but his face carried the same steady calm he had shown through every challenge. When she walked toward him, he smiled, the kind of smile that held both gratitude and awe. "You look like hope," he said quietly as she reached him. She laughed through her tears. "And you look like someone who finally believes in second chances." The officiant spoke briefly, his words carried softly in the wind. "Love," he said, "is not born from perfection. It is born from courage, the courage to see someone at their lowest and still choose to stay." When Grant placed the ring on her finger, the world seemed to pause. "You found me in darkness," he said, his voice trembling. "I promise for the rest of my life I will make sure you never have to walk through it alone." Lily's tears glistened as she replied, "And I promise to remind you that kindness is what keeps us alive." Their vows ended with a kiss under the fading light, and somewhere in the city below, the first stars began to appear. Ethan Cole, standing quietly among the small crowd of staff and friends, wiped his eyes and whispered, "It all started with one wrong room." Osno. Later that evening, as guests gathered around simple tables filled with laughter and gentle music, Grant stood and raised a glass. "To mistakes," he said. "The ones that do not ruin us, but lead us exactly where we need to be." The crowd cheered, and Lily reached for his hand. After the reception, when the night grew quiet again, they returned to the empty hospital hallway where they had first met. The machines were gone, the lights brighter, but the echo of that first heartbeat still seemed to live there. Lily opened her old sketchbook and showed him the first drawing she had made, the portrait of him sleeping peacefully, surrounded by light. "This was the moment I decided to believe in you," she said softly. Grant traced the edges of the page with his finger. "And this," he said, pointing to the framed copy of that same sketch now hanging in the hospital's healing wing, "is the moment I started to believe in us." They stood together in silence, the hum of distant monitors blending with the rhythm of their breathing. Then Grant turned toward her, his hand warm against hers. "You replaced your sister for one night," he said with a gentle smile. "But you ended up giving me forever." Lily smiled, leaning into him as the lights dimmed around them. "I guess fate never makes mistakes," she whispered. And as they walked down the corridor hand in hand, the sound of rain began to fall again, soft, familiar, and full of promise marking. Not an ending, but the quiet beginning of the life they had both been waiting for. Months passed after the wedding, and life began to settle into a rhythm that neither Lily Monroe nor Grant Walters had ever known before. The headlines faded, the cameras moved on, and what remained was something quiet, steady, and real. Their mornings began with sunlight spilling through tall windows and the smell of coffee filling the kitchen. Grant had traded board meetings for morning walks, while Lily continued her work at the new healing wing she now directed. Every corner of the hospital carried a piece of their story. On the first floor hung the framed sketch Lily had drawn the night she spoke to him for the very first time. Beside it was a small plaque that read, "One act of kindness can awaken more than a heart." Visitors often stopped to read it, unaware that the woman walking past in a white coat was the very nurse in the story. Grant spent much of his time at the foundation, overseeing outreach programs and quietly funding hospitals in rural areas. Yet, no matter how busy his days became, he always made time to walk Lily home in the evening. They often stopped by the same cafe across from St. Mark's, where she ordered chamomile tea and he ordered black coffee, claiming he needed to balance out her sweetness with bitterness. One evening, as the city lights shimmered beyond the glass, Lily leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "The one when I walked into the wrong room?" Grant chuckled. "Every single day. I still cannot believe you were even allowed past security." She rolled her eyes. "It was not my fault the name tag on that chart was smudged." "No," he said softly, reaching for her hand. "It was fate, being very specific." She looked down at their joined hands, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I still wonder why it had to happen that way. Why it took all that pain for either of us to slow down." Grant nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe because we would not have understood each other otherwise. You were learning to fight for people. I was learning to let someone fight for me." For a moment, neither spoke. The noise of the city faded to a hum, leaving only the soft rhythm of two lives that had finally found peace. As they walked home that night, Grant stopped near the hospital's entrance. The rain had started again, light and gentle. "I used to hate storms," he said quietly. "The night of my accident it was raining. I thought I would never see another sunrise. But now, every time I hear rain, I think of you sitting by my bed, talking like I was listening." Lily smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were listening. Maybe not the way I expected, but you heard me." Grant slipped his arm around her shoulders as they stepped under the same umbrella. "You know what is strange?" he said. "The rain sounds exactly the same tonight. But now, it does not feel cold anymore." Lemon. They continued walking through the soft drizzle, their reflections trailing beside them on the wet pavement. The hospital lights glowed behind them, a symbol of everything they had survived. Before reaching home, Lily stopped and looked up at him. "Grant, if you could change one thing about what happened about that night, would you?" He thought for a moment and shook his head. "Not one thing. Every wrong turn led me to you." She smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. "Then I guess the wrong room was the right destiny." As thunder rolled gently across the distance, they laughed together, their voices mingling with the sound of rain. In the rhythm of the storm, their story continued, not as a miracle told in headlines, but as two ordinary hearts choosing each other, again and again, under the same sky that had once changed everything. A full year passed since that stormy night when Lily Monroe had stepped into the wrong hospital room. The world had changed around them, but the heartbeat of their story still pulsed quietly in the walls of St. Mark's Medical Center. The healing wing was thriving, filled with laughter, color, and the gentle hum of new beginnings. Families came for care they could finally afford, and every corner carried the same message engraved above the entrance: "Kindness revives the heart." On the anniversary of his recovery, Grant Walters stood beside Lily at the opening ceremony of a new community clinic funded by the Walters Foundation. Reporters were present, but this time, their cameras were not for spectacle. They were there to capture something genuine. Grant spoke briefly to the crowd, his voice calm and certain. "A year ago, I was kept alive by machines," he said. "But it was kindness that taught me how to live again. This center is not built from wealth. It is built from gratitude." The audience applauded, and as he stepped down from the podium, he turned to Lily. "You did this," he whispered. "Every brick, every smile. It started with you." She shook her head gently. "We did this, together. You gave others what you once needed, most a reason to believe." Later that afternoon, after the guests had left and the lights dimmed, they walked through the quiet halls of the new clinic. On one wall hung a familiar object, her old sketchbook, preserved behind glass, open to the first drawing she had made of him. Next to it, a small plaque read, "The moment compassion met courage." Lily ran her fingers across the glass, her voice soft. I never thought something this small could become a part of something so big. Grant smiled. Sometimes the smallest things make the loudest echoes. They stepped outside together, where the city skyline burned gold beneath the setting sunday. The air carried that faint scent of rain again, as if the universe itself remembered their story. Grant reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded note. Do you remember the words you whispered to me that night? She smiled faintly. I said, if you can hear me, keep fighting. He unfolded the paper. Inside was her handwriting from that night, carefully kept all this time. I kept it, he said quietly, because it reminded me that someone out there believed I was still worth saving. Wando. Lily felt tears warm her eyes. You never told me you had this. He laughed softly. You already gave me everything else. They stood there in silence, the sound of rain beginning to fall around them. Grant took her hand and said, So, Mrs. Walters, what happens now? Lily looked up at him, her eyes bright beneath the drizzle. Now we keep doing what we promised, helping others find their way back to life. He smiled, pulling her closer under the umbrella. Then I guess our story is not ending. She leaned against him, her voice steady and warm. No, it is only beginning again. As they walked down the sidewalk hand in hand, the city lights reflected across the wet pavement, turning the world into a shimmer of gold and silver. The rain washed softly against the windows of St. Mark's, the same rhythm that had once echoed through a quiet room on a lonely night. And somewhere inside that familiar sound, the story that began with one mistake and one heartbeat found its peace not as a tale of miracle or fame, but as proof that even a single act of compassion can change everything.